Well, hey, West Valley, friends of West Valley, happy Thursday to you. I hope the week's been going well for you, at least as well as it can. And I hope you've been taking the opportunity to connect more with your family, maybe reach out to some people that you haven't connected with in a while. One of the most difficult things that seems to happen at a time like this, at least as much as we can say what happens at a time like this, is that we start to feel a little distant from each other. And maybe a little disconnected, maybe a little isolated, maybe like we're kind of alone in this thing. And that's really one of the most beautiful ways that God designed the church, to love and to serve each other in really practical ways. And sometimes one of the most practical ways is just letting other people know that you care. So I hope you're doing that. Hope you're taking the opportunity to do that. It would be pretty awesome if we looked back on this time a few weeks from now and could say that our relationships got deeper and stronger. Wouldn't that be great? That'd be awesome. So that's partly why we're posting a video today. Since we're not meeting in person on Sundays right now, we have an opportunity to do something a little bit different. So many of you probably saw the emails from the pastors recently, and they talked about how we're going to be posting several videos throughout the week right now. Some of them are going to be pre-recorded, like this one. Some of them might be live, but they're all a way to stay connected with each other, to remind each other of the power and the goodness of God, to give us some things to discuss throughout the week at home with our families or in life groups. Hopefully this will be beneficial to you. So today, I'm just going to tell you a quick story. And unlike normal, we won't really get too deeply into the meaning of it or to try to draw conclusions from it just yet. Because tomorrow I'm going to tell you another one. I'll tell you another short story, and then Saturday, a third one. And because they're all from the Bible, I'm going to give you the reference and where to look them up, and hopefully you take a few minutes to dig a little bit deeper into those stories for yourself. I will be on Sunday digging back into these and digging back into the meaning and the conclusion. And what can we conclude from the stories, and what do they mean for you and for me? And I'm going to be super interested to hear your thoughts along the way. Like I said, this gives us kind of a unique opportunity to maybe discuss along the way rather than just hear a Sunday message and that be it. So I think these stories have a lot to tell us about ourselves and what God might have in mind for us, and particularly in a really unique time in history like we're experiencing right now. So that being said, let's dive into the first story. And the first story is really kind of a tragedy and comedy all rolled up into one. It has kings and queens, it's got evil schemes, it has a hero, several heroes in fact. And it's really an amazing story. And it starts off with a king, a really powerful king, a king who ended up reigning for about 20 years, between 400 and 500 years or so before Christ. And in his third year on the throne, he decided to do what young, really wealthy, really powerful people sometimes do, which is to throw a party for himself and show off just how powerful and just how wealthy he was. And so he decides he's going to embrace this tenet, go big or go home, and he goes big. And the party ends up lasting for 180 days. And over the last 7 days of this shindig, he's got this amazing feast, unbelievable feast. And the story tells us that everybody who's present could have as much to eat or drink as they wanted. As much as they wanted to drink, each drink was served in a golden cup, and each cup is different. So he clearly spared no expense. And he decides, as part of this lavish game of show and tell, that he wants to show off his queen. She's beautiful. I want people to be even more impressed with me than they are right now, so go fetch the queen, have her parade around, and be admired. Now, being a king, he doesn't ask the queen if she's on board with this plan. Turns out she was not. She wanted nothing to do with it. So of course the king is furious, and he ends up issuing a decree that she's been banished from his presence forever, and he's going to find somebody even more beautiful to replace her with. So he sends people to all corners of his realm, his kingdom, to gather all of the best-looking young women together, and he decides he's going to pick his new queen from that group. Well, I'm sure there's a bunch of girls in that group with interesting backstories, but that is certainly true for one of the girls that ends up being chosen. She's a Jew, and she's displaced from her own homeland. So she's a minority in a place where there's not a lot of other Jews, and it's not very friendly to her or her people. And she's an orphan. She's lost both her parents. She was taken in and raised by her cousin. But because she's young and beautiful, she gets picked to join this group. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what she thought of this whole arrangement, but it doesn't really matter in those days because she's not given a choice. The king says jump, and she says how high, right? And so she goes. And then we get some detail in the story about how she and the others are treated. And they're given the finest things and carefully prepared for the time they'll meet the king. But one detail we shouldn't overlook here is that these girls were there to make the king happy. So without getting too graphic here, the king could and did use them how he wanted for his own pleasure, and then basically ignore them. So it's not a great deal all the way around. Even though you're treated well, there's kind of a downside to this. Except for the one woman who would please him more than the others, she would become the new queen. And that's our girl. She wows this guy, and the story tells us that in addition to impressing him, she made friends with everybody else. People ended up thinking of her very favorably. Everybody loves her, and so she ends up in this position even though she came from nothing. Now, I mentioned that this girl had been raised by her cousin, and one of the things her cousin told her before she left was, try to keep your heritage a secret. Don't tell the king that you're a Jew. You keep that under wraps. Don't rock the boat, because who knows what the king might do if he knew. So why don't you just keep that to yourself? And so to make sure that he can keep an eye on her and do what he can to keep her safe, he hangs around pretty near the palace. He wants to check in on her periodically and just make sure she's okay. And so one day as he's hanging around, he overhears a plot to kill the king. And so he tells his cousin, and she tells the king, and that ends up saving the king's life. So she was already in pretty good with the king, but this cements it even more. She's carved out a pretty charmed place for herself in all of this. And as long as she doesn't do anything to upset anyone, she keeps building up points with the king. Now, at this point, you might recognize the story, right? This girl's name is Esther. Her cousin's name is Mordecai. And the story is found in the book of Esther in the Old Testament. And the story goes on to tell us that the king decides to honor somebody in his court. And we don't know why or what this guy did to deserve it, but he ends up identifying this guy and gives him a seat of honor, and he demands that everyone else bow down to him, which of course goes straight to this guy's head, right? He starts thinking that he's untouchable, that he makes it his business to see that everybody that he encounters bows down to him. Well, because Mordecai's hanging around, he's one of the people that should bow down to arrogant guy, real name is Haman, but he doesn't. He refuses. I'm not going to bow down to anybody. And you can imagine that this upsets Haman pretty badly because he's got a pretty inflated sense of his own importance here, and he decides he's going to make Mordecai pay. And not just Mordecai, but because he finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, he hatches a plan to wipe out all the Jews. Everybody that's important to Mordecai. And the plan is that he goes in to see the king and he tells him a whole bunch of lies about how insubordinate the Jews are and how they're trying to undermine the king. Which, as you can imagine, does not sit very well with the king. So he decrees all Jews are to be killed. Young and old, men, women, and children. Kill them all and take everything that they have. Take everything that they own. It's all mine now. They're all dead. Okay, so now obviously Mordecai is distraught to hear this. So he gets word to Esther that, listen, the king has made this decree, and maybe you haven't heard about it yet, and he asks her for help. He says, hey, maybe you can go in and see the king and beg him to spare your people. Sounds like a good plan. She seems to be closer to the king than a lot of people. Except that Esther says no. No, I'm not going to do that. She tells him that there's a rule in place that states that unless you're summoned to see the king, anyone who approaches him without permission is to be killed. And I haven't been summoned, so there's that. Sorry, can't help. Well, Mordecai tells her, hey, listen, reconsider. Don't make the mistake of thinking that because you're a Jew, or that because you're the queen, you'll be spared. You're still a Jew. You stay silent, and you and all of your family are getting killed. But if you seize the opportunity to make a difference here, maybe something could happen. Maybe. Maybe you could end up making a real impact. And so she decides to. And it's rolling the dice here. There's a very real possibility that when she does this, she's going to anger the king, and he very well may put her to death. But she thinks about the consequences of not doing it and decides, well, if I die, I die. So she goes in to see the king. Now, if you're familiar with the story, you know that she doesn't die. The king doesn't just extend the invitation to be in his presence, but he's happy to see her. He agrees to listen to her. And she ends up exposing all of the lies that Haman told. Now, while this has been going on, Haman has been plotting a particularly ugly death for Mordecai. And in a really violent, but I have to admit kind of satisfying little plot twist, the king ends up killing Haman in exactly the same way that Haman suggested the king kill Mordecai, which is by impaling him on a long pole, which sounds pretty brutal. So the king ends up killing Haman and rescinding the order to kill all of the Jews. And the upshot of all of this is that Mordecai and Esther and the Jews are spared. And everything more or less turns out pretty good, despite the fact that it could have gone sour in all kinds of ways. And it ended up giving the Jews one of their main holidays, known as Purim, which they still observe to this day. So it's impact. She had impact then, she had impact for history. Now, it's a great story, and on its own, it's pretty fascinating to read. But there are some things that we can learn from this story that are going to end up being really relevant to our lives today. And we're going to take some of those things along with what we learned from the next two stories, and we're going to get into some conclusions on Sunday. But I want to, in advance of Sunday, encourage you to read this story for yourself. It's in the book of Esther, and it's 10 chapters long, and they're 10 very short chapters. So it's totally doable. In fact, the 10th chapter is like a paragraph long. But if you want a hint about some of the important stuff about this, or in this story, pay special attention to chapter 4. Think about who the important people in the story are. Think about what they do, think about what they say, and then see what you can learn from it. Feel free to write some stuff down. Talk to your family about it. Talk to your life group about it. Shoot me a note on it. And let's have a discussion. We'll debrief on this on Sunday. So we'll get into some of the conclusions and really where the rubber meets the road for this and the other two stories on Sunday. So there you have it. That's story number 1 of this little mini series this week. As we go, I'll be praying for you. And we certainly appreciate the prayers as well. And on that note, I'm just going to close in prayer for today. All right, join me. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for keeping us all safe throughout a kind of crazy time in our history. For those who have gotten sick, Father, I pray that your healing hand would be on them. I pray, God, that you would just move through our lives and through our families in a really powerful, amazing way right now. That even though so many things are shut down and life as we know it is kind of in some sort of upheaval, Father, that you are stable, you are the same yesterday, today, and forever, and we can trust you. We can trust that you have our best life in mind, our safety in mind, our eternity in mind. And Father, you've given us an opportunity here to do who knows what. Who knows the effect that we could have on the world around us in a difficult time if we just seize the opportunity here. So Father, thank you. Thanks for being with us today. Just go with us wherever we're going, whatever we're doing. God, live in our hearts and our minds and our thoughts and in our actions. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, thanks for joining us. Feel free to point other people to this and to the videos to come, and we'll see you tomorrow. And in the meantime, love each other well, look for opportunities to serve each other's needs, and know that you're loved. See ya.